Welcome to the Katie Wellness Show, where you get the tools, knowledge, and inspiration you need to transform your health and wellness, body, mind, and spirit. You'll learn holistic and practical wellness strategies that empower you to reclaim your health and fully step into your power. You belong here as you learn to tap into your intuition to support your body every step of the way. Let go of what's no longer serving you and teach these tools and strategies to your family to raise emotionally and physically resilient children. Hi, welcome back to the Katie Wellness Show. I am your host, Lindsay Katie. In today's episode, we are talking about trauma. And in this episode, I do not mean to discount anyone's experiences. I am simply bringing light and conversation to this topic. What constitutes trauma? What causes one person to see an experience as traumatic and another person not? Here's what I found as like the technical definition of what is trauma. What constitutes a traumatic event is highly subjective and depends on individual experiences, coping mechanisms, and personal circumstances. Basically, it means that there is no one single event that will cause trauma for every person. It very much depends on the person's individual experiences, their age, their maturity, things that they've previously lived through. It can also depend on their coping mechanisms, so how they deal with stress, how they deal with experiences that seem negative, and their personal circumstances. Do we have someone that we can rely on during a time where we might be experiencing a traumatic event? Do we have a support system? Do we feel safe? Do we feel loved? Do we feel supported? Do we feel like we have someone that we can talk to about these experiences? So the same event can affect people very differently. And when I think of the question, do you have trauma? I also think, do you have a pulse? Chances are, if you have a pulse, you have lived through traumatic experiences. But whether those traumatic experiences have left you with trauma, left you with built up resentment, built up stuck energy in your body, leaving you with nightmares, anxiety, like negative effects, depends on those three things, right? Your individual experiences, your coping mechanisms, and your personal circumstances. And it does not matter whether it is, I've heard it as big T trauma and little t trauma, and it really just does not matter. The source of the trauma, whether it was like a big T abuse or you were in a vehicle accident, right? Or if it was little, like you perceived that the only way to get your needs met was by acting a certain way. Or you felt abandoned, or you felt like someone didn't love you, like mom didn't love you or dad didn't love you. Those can also be just as traumatic depending on, again, the individual's experiences, their coping mechanisms, their lens through which we see the world really affects how we store traumatic events, how we remember them, how we store those emotions in our bodies that are associated with that event for each of us individually. Now, when I was researching for this episode, I found a very interesting statistic, and it says that 28 to 90% of people, that is a huge range, and it just seems really ridiculous to me, and I actually think it's higher than that. But the statistic is 28 to 90% of people in developed countries have experienced at least one traumatic event. And like I said, I think the percentage is probably even higher than that, just on based on the number of people that I've helped through different emotional processing sessions. The top 3 most traumatic experiences that were listed in this study was an unexpected death of a loved one, a motor vehicle accident, and being mugged, which I could agree any one of those could feel very traumatic and could end up leaving a person feeling very out of control out of their own life, leaving fear stuck in the body. And it is totally normal to feel afraid during and after these intense situations. Situations like a natural disaster or acts of violence, abuse, car crashes, unexpected death of a loved one. Fear, though, that fear or those perceived negative emotions turn into trauma when the fear gets stuck in our bodies, when we don't know how to understand or process the fear, when we don't have a support system or someone asking us about our experiences or helping us to release that emotion, that fear, that feeling of out of control. And especially when it feels unjustified, right? When the act or the situation feels unjustified, or if it's too hurtful for us to accept, we may resist letting it go. We stuff it down, we try to ignore it, we try to forget. And trauma, just as every single person experiences trauma differently, meaning an experience can cause one person to have trauma, but another. Trauma can also manifest in different ways for lots of us. Trauma can look like anxiety, uncontrollable anger, debilitating sadness, or it could be trouble sleeping or concentrating, brain fog, always feeling on edge. Or it could be nothing at first, but then later, years later, it will manifest as physical symptoms. It could be smaller, like headaches or constipation, hormonal imbalances, or if we ignore our bodies and if we ignore those symptoms long enough, it could turn into an autoimmune disease. So you're living the human experience. You experience traumatic events. You've survived a traumatic experience. And now what? How do you prevent trauma from being stored into your body and causing illness further down the road, whether it's mental illness, whether it's physical illness, emotional illness, spiritual illness? How do we not let this trauma control our lives? And I thought of three ways that I have helped clients work through some of these traumatic experiences. And I will say I don't know everything, right? And I'm always open to learning and holding space for different experiences and really trying to have compassion for everyone's experiences. Instead of discounting someone's trauma because, well, that would not have been traumatic for me, so it shouldn't be traumatic for you, right? I really try and not have that perspective. I really try to keep an open mind. But these 3 steps, I'm hoping and praying that they will help you as well and give you the hope that you need to the courage, maybe even to let go, even though you don't know what's on the other side. Like sometimes we hold on to trauma because it feels safer than letting it go because we don't know what it's like to let it go, or we don't know, maybe if we let it go, then something will come around to us that's worse, right? So here's my encouragement for you. You've survived a traumatic experience. Now what? accept that it is okay to ask for help and that you are not alone. Find someone who is in your corner. And if you don't have someone in your life right now who you feel like you can rely on, that you can talk to, I will be in your corner. I will be rooting for you. I will hold space for you. I will not judge you for holding on to experiences differently than I would. It doesn't make you weak or dumb or a burden or any other thing that you are telling yourself. If you have trauma, you are not a burden, right? The trauma is a burden on you, and it is okay to ask for help. You are worthy of your help. You are worthy of help, and you are worthy of health. Number 2, find a professional who can help you release the trauma. Not just talk about it. I find that just talking about the experience or the traumatic event just stirs up old feelings. And then you leave feeling maybe even worse because you really just talked about it and you hashed it out and you relived it, but you didn't really do anything with it. You just talked about it. So I want to challenge you to find someone who challenges your thinking. I want you to find someone who asks you why you're still holding on to the trauma. And I want you to find someone who helps you move that crap out of your body because it is making you sick. And you are worthy of help and you are worthy of health. Now, once you get all that crap out, you need to find someone, work with someone who will reprogram your brain to deal with old triggers, right? Just because we get rid of one traumatic experience does not mean that we won't have recurring experiences that might bring up those old beliefs, those old coping mechanisms, those old thought patterns. You need a plan to deal with the people, the smells, the sounds, the events that will remind you of a traumatic experience. Reprogramming your brain allows you to find a new way to respond to old triggers without bringing all the baggage along with it. These 3 steps especially make me so grateful that I have found emotional processing. And it is one thing that, although I did not grow up in a home that most people would consider traumatic, right? Big T trauma. I was never abused. I don't remember my parents yelling at me or spanking me or neglecting me, like withholding food. You know, some of these bigger things that you would typically think would cause trauma, right? But I was an oldest child who was choosing to be over responsible. I thought it was my job, just from my own perception, I thought it was my job to make mom happy and to make dad happy and to show up perfectly and to take care of my siblings and to never make mistakes, right? That it was my perception that was causing me to cope in a certain way, that as I grew into an adult, I was bringing a lot of baggage along with me. Emotional processing has been the biggest blessing in my life, because it has given me this beautiful resource of releasing this, challenging that thinking. Like, I've had emotional processing facilitators ask me, well, who told you that that was your job? Who told you it was your job to take responsibility of your siblings? Well, no one told me that. I just felt like it was my job, right? They challenged that thinking and they asked me why I was still holding on to it, and they helped me move it out. They helped me move out the resentment and the guilt of thinking that bad things were my fault. And they helped me reprogram. They helped me find a new way. One thing that I think is really important is that as we get trauma out, as we get the negative and the heavy out, we have to replace it with something good. And if we replace it with something good intentionally, there is power in that. And I think it's really important not just to talk about the trauma, but really challenge our beliefs around it and our coping mechanisms, and really ask, is this working? Is this type of coping mechanism working? And if it's not, okay, what can we replace it with instead? So my question is, do you have trauma? The answer is likely yes, because you're human, because you've been born. Birth often is seen as a traumatic experience. Coming to earth and having that separation from God can be seen as traumatic. Having the veil close, being an oldest child, being a youngest child, losing a loved one, being in a vehicle accident, all of these things can cause trauma. Hearing sirens can feel traumatic for a little kid who maybe doesn't understand what's going on. So do you have trauma? And if the answer is yes, what are you going to do about it? Because you have options, you have resources. I cannot recommend emotional processing more. I've seen it work miracles in my own life, in my physical symptoms, in my emotional state, and I have seen it release years and years of pent-up anger and frustration and anxiety from people that I have worked with one-on-one. I've seen it improve relationships and allow people to find their voice and to take back their power. And it changes, right? Remember, trauma is based on our individual experiences and our coping mechanisms and our personal circumstances. Processing is a way to not only change your coping mechanisms, but giving you coping mechanisms that actually work. And it helps give you experiences that help broaden your perception of what is actually life and death stressful. Because so often we get caught up in the little things that sometimes we feel are life and death. But really, when we zoom out and we take a different look at it, we realize that we were just in it so deep that we couldn't see another way. Emotional processing is that way to take a step back and look at the overall picture and choose a new way and let go of the old and find new coping mechanisms and move forward in life instead of staying stuck, instead of holding on to anger, resentment, fear, anxiety, depression. Instead of hanging on to any of those things, it truly is a release and a letting go. And it's beautiful. And I want to give you my love and my encouragement that you do not have to hold on to this trauma anymore. There is a way out. And I would encourage you to find someone who can help you release it. And if you need to work with someone in person, there is a link in the description box below to the school that I trained through, the emotional facilitating school. But I also do emotional processing sessions over the phone. I don't even have to see your face if you don't want me to, right? It can be very private and confidential, and it's beautiful. It's a beautiful process to walk away feeling lighter and feeling more mentally clear and letting go of the weight of trauma. So if you need a professional to work with, I am in your corner. I am rooting for you. I would love to work with you if you feel like that is something that would be right for you. Check out the comment box below for more information on how to work with me. But just know that I love you and I am praying for you, and that you do not need to hold on to your trauma anymore. You can release it and you can reprogram your brain, and there is beauty and there is healing available to you. Thank you for sticking with this episode with me. Hopefully it wasn't too heavy. Hopefully you leave feeling encouraged and lighter and knowing that there is something that you can do. I love you, and I will see you next week.